All right, without further ado.
Great.
Okay, since we couldn't get anybody else to open the exhibition, I'm going to open the exhibition, and I'm very happy to because I was part of it. Okay, so hello all, welcome to the virtual version of Data Heirlooms for the Radiant Pavilion Festival. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Judith Glover. I'm a senior lecturer in industrial design program at RMIT. I'm also the co-director of the Wearable and Sensing Network with co-creator of this exhibition, Emma Luke. This exhibition encompasses a number of key creative works outcomes for Emma Luke, Chuan, Khoo and Geck in their current PhD candidatures. Myself, Dr. Murnish Latifi from Swinburne, and our research assistant, Jackie Pokrovsky, played a supporting role in the creating of one of the key works, Crypto Mori, which in the real life version was supposed to be installed in the design archive window on Victoria Street tonight. We were supposed to be all out there in real life, having a drink, experiencing the real life version of this. So it was not as we planned. This virtual version was not quite as we planned. Like all creatives across Melbourne, people have been planning for exhibitions and performances across 2021 and having to pivot to virtual and online versions. It's part of the ethos and professional practice of all creatives that the show must go on. And we are blessed with the tenacity and skills of Chuan, Emma and Kate to create a high quality virtual version of this show. So much physical work has already gone into this show, and we plan to have a real life version at the RMIT Design Archive next year with a series of events tied to the Wearable and Sensing Network on technology and creative practice. We'd like to thank the team at the Design Archive and RMIT Design Hub for their advice and technical support in trying to organise both the physical and virtual events. We'd like to thank Radiant Pavilion for allowing us to be part of the festival. Tonight, we'd like to take you on a tour of the exhibition, discussing key works by the designers who collaborated and created them. This is being recorded, and if you can't stay for the full tour, we'll put the video on the Data Heirlooms website for later. An enormous amount of work has gone into both the physical works and their digital versions. And the reason we can show a virtual version is so much of the making process has a digital outcome, a digital twin. A key dialogue of the works is indeed how we as designers and users interact with the digital world through various types of technology and data. As designers, we're always probing and experimenting with the new against the old. For physical artifacts, how does the materiality change through the use of digital in design and fabrication in that cycle? How do we interact with data in ways that are everything from playful to profound? As the Data Heirlooms website states, the work in this show explores various ways we can capture, project, memorialise digital moments in precious data objects connecting us across time and space. Without further ado, I'd like to open this exhibition and congratulate Emma, Kate and Chuan for the high quality outcomes that will be important parts of their PhD outcomes and the start of hopefully many more interesting collaborations between us and others under the name of Data Heirlooms. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jude. Thank you. That was a really wonderful introduction. Thank you. And so I suppose before we start formally talking about the works, I just wanted to make an acknowledgement of country. So on behalf of everyone here this afternoon or this evening, I'd just like to acknowledge the people of the Wairarung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we're presenting our work this evening. And I'd like to respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past, present and emerging. It's important for us to pay our respects to the traditional custodians of these lands, these skies and these waters, where all of us teach, learn and live. And I'd like to extend warmth, especially to any Indigenous people who might be joining us tonight. And importantly, I want to end by just acknowledging that design and knowledge sharing has been happening on these lands for tens of thousands of years. And a lot of the themes that we are exploring as designers in this exhibition around planetary connections and how to share and how to store stories are not new. And they've been considered on these lands for many thousands of years before us. So thank you. So Emma and Chuan, did you want to talk about the project?
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay. Thank you for the fantastic introduction, everybody. And and welcome to this digital manifestation of our show. So Data Heirlooms is a creative collaboration that was born out of many PhD research conversations between Chuan and myself. That began in 2019 over our collective interests in post-digital craft, techno-animism, data and materiality. The post-digital refers to the state in which the disruption brought on by digital technology has already occurred. It addresses the humanization of digital technologies through the interplay between digital, biological, cultural and spiritual systems, between cyberspace and real space, between high-tech and high-touch experiences. Little did we know that back then remote digital work would become such a dominant factor in our lives and such a critical kind of aspect of the way that we've actually progressed in developing these projects and the exhibition. And I'll hand over to Chuan.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I guess to add on to what Emma said, I think we were also trying to, in a lot of our projects that we are seeing today, 7 projects here, some of which do explore the notion around interaction design, product design as a means to animate these ideas. There was an opportunity to explore interactivity as a mediation between our digital traces and the built environment too. Now, what's really interesting during these times at least, is that given a rather salient landscape we're now facing, this notion of data manifesting within, on and around what we saw as precious objects took on a new dimension. With this digital saturation we are now facing with online learning, social isolation, and lockdowns, generally speaking, will we gravitate towards a nod to less pervasive forms of data consumption and interactions? It has also been a rather particularly interesting journey where we've had to respond to the uncertain conditions of lockdown, and having had a shift to a new digital format had meant a whole new way to think about how we were going to exhibit our work. The irony is certainly not lost in our realization that we were presenting works that critique the digital data milieu while still being trapped in this format. So with that, we would like to say welcome to the show, and I will now hand it back over to Kate to continue with the presentation.
Great. So I just wanted to make some more acknowledgements and say thank you again to everyone who's helped make the exhibition possible, because as Emma, Chuan and Jude have alluded to, essentially there's been 2 exhibitions planned, and this is the digital twin for what was supposed to be a physical exhibition. So we really want to thank Anne Carew from the RMIT Design Archives for her endless support and help, as well as the RMIT Technical Services team, so Eric North, Simon Maish and Tim McLeod, for all of their assistance with the install, as well as to help us produce this event right now. The MDIT program and Ross McLeod for letting us use their exhibition system. Originally it was to be physical, but we have a digital twin in the online galleries on the website. And on that, the exhibition as we're presently experiencing it would not be possible without the beautiful website crafted by Chuan Khoo, a fantastic effort and an absolutely beautiful, attentive testament to the work that we've done. So thank you so much, Chuan. And an extra special thanks to Emma for all of the fantastic 3D galleries that you crafted for us and furnished and built for us so that we can try to immerse ourselves in the work. And Emma, again, thank you so much for all of your work in managing this project and basically organising 2 exhibitions. So a lot of thank yous there as well. So without any more acknowledgements, maybe we can start having a look at some of the work. The first work that we're going to take you through is Cryptomori, which was to be installed in the window on Swanston Street, but we now have this digital version that we can have a look at today. So Emma, did you want to talk about the project?
Thanks, Kate. Okay, so yeah, this interactive digital exhibition is obviously a little bit of an experiment. We're fortunate enough to find a platform called At Studio, and 2 weeks ago we had a face-to-face real physical exhibition with a whole lot of incredible material artifacts that we were installing in the exquisite space at the Design Archives at RMIT, and we realised we were going to have to make the difficult decision of trying to work out what we could do within the context of current circumstances and be able to sort of still be part of Radiant Pavilion, which is this amazing contemporary jewellery and objects symposium. It's a biennale, and it's every 2 years. So we, been sort of working towards this for that amount of time, and it was like, okay, well, we have all these incredible assets and beautiful kind of process work, and we actually do have a lot of 3D work. What can we kind of do in 2 weeks to kind of pull this together? So yeah, bear with us. This is a little bit of an experiment. We'll see how it goes. So Cryptomori is a collaboration between Kate, myself and Judith, and then we've also had the incredible talents of Jackie and Murnosh coming in to sort of help us out with this project. It's a really ambitious project. It's basically in essence a sort of a post-digital kind of memento mori interactive sort of installation that we've done around the basis of thinking about how we might sort of go about designing a digital kind of future memento mori towards cryptograms. So a cryptogram is comprised of a series of tiny, incredible plant-like creatures. So liverworts, mosses, hornworts, macrolichen, and fungi. Kate and I were really sort of taken with the extraordinary nature of these unbelievable sort of little complex organisms and the incredible sort of impact they have on the ecosystem, biodiversity, keeping life going and all that sort of stuff, and the fact that they're sort of rapidly disappearing with climate change. And so we're sort of kind of really thinking about, okay, so how can we sort of think about the idea of a digital sort of data heirloom or memento mori to these extraordinary little creatures, and what might that kind of look like in a sort of future sense as some sort of kind of time capsule to the future. So Cryptomori uses a combination of data physicalization and augmented reality to mediate on the diminishing biodiversity in Victoria, especially after sort of the recent bushfires. Hope to move beyond an anthropocentric vanitas and reflect on planetary kind of loss. It's an interactive work which is realised using augmented reality projection, ceramic vessels, and digital textiles. So we've sort of really kind of taken on the extraordinary talents of Jude and her team in, sort of the materiality of making these extraordinary vessels, in these kind of real sort of, I guess, quite ancient ways of making. And then things like Kate's sort of work in digital textiles and the augmented reality space, and then how we might also start to think about stuff like creative coding and data physicalization. I'll hand over to Kate.
Great, thanks so much, Emma. So I suppose this project is very much in progress, and so we've been kind of engaging in this remote collaboration where we've all been, I suppose, progressing the idea on different fronts and then coming together when we can to kind of compare artifacts and notes and see how to move the project forward. And I suppose what Emma was touching on is really critical, I suppose, to the idea of the project. We're sort of trying to think about ways to sensorially engage people with difficult information or with little known information. And so these cryptograms, we were kind of drawn to them because they're so critical in the formation of soil and in the cycling of nutrients. But there's so much that's not known about these organisms. Scientists do estimate that the biodiversity of these organisms is kind of rapidly diminishing. And so I suppose we were trying to wonder how we might tell the story of these organisms and make, an aesthetic object at the same time. So we've sort of settled on this this offering, of these urns that are augmented with the projection with like a textile behind that. And so we're sort of trying to infuse different nodes or points of data and information, as well as, I suppose, aesthetic impressions that we have of these cryptograms into these forms and surfaces that we've been producing. And I suppose, further to that, there's this idea of, how can we think on a planetary scale about loss? Often when we conceive of loss through climate change, it's a human-centric perspective. So we thought that maybe by illuminating the story of these under-researched organisms, we could maybe compel people to engage, you know, on a greater level with the loss of biodiversity. So yeah, you can kind of see some of the initial offerings that we've made. Jude has been working really hard on forming some of the vessels. We haven't been able to do much AR testing on the vessels as yet because we haven't been able to meet up. But we've been sort of testing some of the augmented reality projection on similar kind of forms to get a sense of how we might articulate them with light and image. And Jude is in the studio live right now and can show us maybe some of the process and things that are involved.
Yeah, I'm the only designer in Melbourne working at the moment in their real space. No, I have got a work permit to go in. Just that we happen to be doing this afternoon because we are trying to keep processing the work because we are going to do an installation in the design archive window as soon as we can to test it out. Because as Kate said, we've done bits and pieces here and there, but we've never put it together in the final kind of installation. So that beautiful digital stuff, you know, that's all been cut on the CNC and ready for us to just finish and sand. And then we've started to, we have actually, there's our first jug out of, or our first urn out of the kiln. And then the lighter one next to it is the second cast. In the background over there, in that big white box, is our fourth cast. And if anybody doesn't know about slip casting, Jackie's just going to pour into the lid mold. Tom said his students want to know.
Oh, fantastic.
So as Kate said, it's a really old technique, you know, and that, I mean, that's always the interesting thing for us, the old and the new. And we could, if we wanted to, put an enormous amount of digital overlay on the actual urn itself in terms of the making process. But instead, and you could have had on that urn, you could have had incredible sort of parametric design or ornamentation on that, but the whole point was then the projections would get lost. So we actually had to make it quite plain because we've experimented with that quite a bit anyway. But the whole idea is then how the projections wrap around those 3D forms, and that'll be really interesting to actually see and something we'll collaborate further on, I guess, in bigger spaces. So in terms of the slip cast process, you pour it up, and then it starts to develop a skin, and then when you get enough, you just pour it out, and then you've actually got. So for instance, here we go. There's a cast version of that.
Oh, can you lift it up a bit, Jude?
Ah, okay. So that's what should pop out of the mold, something like that, when it's done.
Amazing.
So, and just those ends are a bit tricky just because of their scale. Like that mold is 80 kilograms. The actual plaster mold's 80 kilograms. So it's just difficult to move around and stuff. Not hugely difficult process. But yeah, I think the mixing of the old and new. And then the idea that, and you know, when we were kind of, the whole thing was sort of like the exhibition wasn't going to happen and all that sort of stuff. And then it was getting delayed and we couldn't even get the clay. And then there's all this sort of stuff happening. And then we were kind of like, do we just make the urns out of foam, like, and just paint them and nobody would know? And I don't know, it's a bit of an anathema to a maker to sort of fake it that much. You wouldn't have known, but we would have. But there is something in that materiality, like the terracotta, it's a very beautiful material. So, and from our video tests, the light projection on it is quite spectacular. So it's going to be really interesting to see it in that design archive window when it's done. So yeah, there's a bit of process work happening in real time.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is crossing live to the studio.
Actually, Simon, can you just go back down onto the table for a sec? I just want to show a couple of the projection tests, I think on slide 3. So, you know, one of the things about this project is that, yeah, it's all happened during lockdown. And so, you know, we've only been able to kind of get together in these kind of fleeting kind of moments when we're allowed to. So, for instance, if you zoom in, Simon, on that cardboard pieces of cardboard. Okay, so that was Jude and I in the studio. You know, one afternoon we were able to go into work, doing initial kind of projection tests to get a sense of the scale and what was kind of gonna work. And then if you go up to the image just above it, Kate and I were in the design hub. Yeah, you can see the urns on the back of some chairs. We were doing a little bit of improv to kind of work out the size and scale of the window. So yeah, it's been a really, really challenging way to kind of have to remotely sort of do things when you know you can't access materials, you can't access space, and you can't actually see people. But yeah, learn a lot.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thanks for that. Shall we move on to the next project so we can keep chatting? I think next is actually. Next project is my project. So I'll talk really quickly about this because I really want everyone else to talk about their work. So that's just loading. This project is an ongoing project within my PhD, and it's called Enfolded Emblems. And I suppose the idea of this project is how objects themselves can kind of act as thresholds to memory and to mood, and importantly to atmosphere. So it's an ongoing project, and there's multiple artifacts, and these artifacts are commemorative objects. So I sort of became focused on, I suppose, different cycles that were kind of resulted in reflection for me. So I kind of narrowed it down to cycles of birth and death. And from that, I've been kind of trying to develop these physical objects, so through textile design and through laser cut acrylic, to kind of make these commemorative and reflective objects that are augmented with some sort of a somaesthetic practice. So the idea is, you know, I suppose I became really interested in these processes of reflection and remembering, and from that I sort of began to isolate how, I guess, objects and bodily practices specifically can contribute to atmosphere. So they're kind of the elements that I want to work with. And so within objects, that kind of encompasses materialities, and within bodily practices, that kind of encompasses, you know, corporeal materialities. So different actions and movements that you do, breathing and stretching, that might contribute to a particular mood or state. And so I'm kind of really interested in how we use objects to kind of store our memories. And essentially these objects kind of become proxies of our experiences. But importantly, the experiences kind of flow out of the objects and into space to kind of contribute to atmosphere and mood in domestic settings. So there's sort of two parts to the project. There's the material processes, so all of the different techniques that I've been using to kind of make surfaces. And so it's all kind of on-demand making. I use a whole range of different machines in my studio. So I have embroidery machines, knitting machines, foil machines, and I can kind of generate surfaces digitally that kind of manifest physically and can be finished by hand. And then the other part of that is the design of the AR overlays, or the prompts that kind of encourage reflection and contemplation. So, you know, in this space, hopefully people can kind of have a look through the space and see the objects. They're quite detailed. It's kind of difficult to talk to, that the sort of things they're designed to be touched. But there's kind of a whole range of different processes that I've been working with. And part of this project has been trying to develop, I suppose, like an ongoing taxonomy of materialities that kind of keeps shifting. And that taxonomy is kind of ordered in a variety of bespoke ways, that's always evolving, but it's kind of focused on the perceived qualities of surfaces, so how surfaces, you know, feel, and what kind of internal, you know, felt response a tactile surface might produce when you kind of engage with it, as well as the technical processes that produce those particular surfaces. So the one that you can see on the screen at the moment is digital jacquard, machine embroidery, and marbling. And so that object becomes an augmented reality marker that, when it's scanned with an app, plays what I've started to call restorative content, so kind of contemplative animations, or it might give a somaesthetic prompt to kind of engage in some type of stretching or breathing activity. So you know, the AR app is, I suppose, you know, highly idiosyncratic. It's really personal. They're not artifacts that are designed for the middle. They're really personal objects and personal outcomes. And part of that reason is that the process of making is really critical to the generation of the atmosphere as well. You know, engaging in these laborious processes to make personally meaningful things with these kind of embedded symbol systems kind of contributes to that reflective atmosphere. Yeah, so that's all I think I have to say about that. Yeah, hopefully you can have a look in there and see the works themselves. So shall we keep moving at our breakneck pace onto the next project? So I think we are looking at one of Chuan's projects. I gave the internet a wooden heart. So Chuan, did you want to tell us about that?
Thanks, Kate. So this is one of the 3 projects I'll be showing in this exhibition, and similar to what Kate has mentioned, these are all kind of works that have been contributing to my own creative practice, PhD research all along these years. So the wooden heart itself, and I'll show a quick demonstration of it later on. I'm not sure how successful that will be through this kind of online space. But in summary, I gave the internet a wooden heart as an attempt to translate the sentiment of any online text passage into the primal rhythm of a heart. Silent when left on a charging base, each wooden heart comes to life when picked up and cupped in one's hands. The haptic engine mimics the sensation and transforming rate for heartbeat, each interval slewing towards next. The materiality of an angular, heart-shaped pine casing belies the presence of this electronic and digital connection concealed within its true heart that is the information melting pot of the internet. These wooden hearts are an offering and a repose to the condition of interaction brevity, something that I'm trying to develop in my PhD, a digital culture of ever condensing narratives. Technically speaking, a combination of open source and commercial sentiment analysis algorithms. So we have the AFIN 111, Veda, and IBM's Watson's natural language understanding algorithms are first used to deconstruct the text passage's various emotions. We have positivity, we have negativity of any text that you can find online. And we can also further break it down into the following 5 qualities: joy, anger, disgust, sadness, and fear. So all of that is blended into a composite scale of shifting heart rates that a haptic engine elicits. And so these different emotional qualities, much like the complexities of life, all impose and contest their own influence and sway on these wooden imaginations of the internet's pulse. The feedback is consequently difficult to decipher, colored by our own biases, disposition, and contextual situation, hopefully prompting moments for reflection of our digital traces and how we behave online. So just very quickly, while that screen is being moving around the 3D space, let me just turn on the lights. There you go. And I'll switch on my camera to the other side. I think the students who are in this class will be so familiar with the setup. So it's my cooking show. These are the wooden hearts, and wooden hearts are, probably the most difficult one to really communicate through an online space because they are haptic devices. And the idea is that when you would pick it up, it actually, you have to believe me when I say this, they actually start throbbing. And if you hold it really close to your hands, you can actually feel that rhythm shifting depending on what I feed to it through the internet. So it's almost like an emblem or a way for us to capture what the disposition of the internet is right now without having the need to look for maybe a screen or to scroll and do what we call doom scrolling on Instagram or any other form of digital media. So that is the reason why I gave the internet a wooden heart, or in this case, 2 wooden hearts to be exact. So that's it for the wooden hearts, and maybe let's move on now to the next project, which happens to be back to Kate again, possible evolutions.
Yes, Doris, this is the last time I'll be talking, guys. So this project is called Impossible Evolutions, and I suppose this project is again exploring digital and physical materialities. But in this project, I sort of started to wonder how intelligent algorithms, so machine learning, might be used for collaboration and creativity rather than the control of our attention. So I suppose I sort of started from a point of speculating on the virtual, thinking about what we know versus what we think that we know versus what machines know versus what might be known, and to kind of wonder how all of these things might become part of a creative process. So typically intelligent algorithms are kind of used in the service of attention extraction. They learn from us and they become attuned to us so that they can, I suppose, sort and store our tastes to kind of further entice us to content and to digital capital. But I sort of started to wonder what other paradigms or ways of working with machine intelligence might there be, and can that, I suppose, attention extraction be reframed or thought of as attentiveness, and what kind of design might result if we thought about different possibilities for algorithmic intelligences in collaboration. And so this project uses a machine learning model. This is, essentially this is, I guess, a fact-finding project for me, where I'm sort of trying to understand a new technology and understand how I might use it. So all of these things are kind of samples that I would hope to use in more finished pieces eventually. But I sort of started to think about, how, a machine might, again, help us kind of imagine planetary loss and understand what might not be in the future. So for this project, I've been working with, I started by working with hand drawings of Australian fungi, so line drawings of fungi, and then sent that to a machine learning model that then was trained on that data set of hand-drawn pencil images. And so they're all like quick pencil sketches. And then the machine then produced a whole bunch of them, thousands of them. And from those thousands, I kind of chose some that, had aesthetic appeal to me, that I also thought would work well as embroidery designs. And so translated those into embroidery designs to use on the machine. And then I worked with another GAN process to kind of generate a whole bunch of textures based on different fungal forms, and then digitally printed those and then stitched them up. So, in the interests of home studio sharing, I can actually, if you want to stop screen sharing, I can show you right here. It's all set up because it's all in progress, because it's not finished. It'll never be finished. But this is kind of the textile in progress. So I don't know how easily you can see, but there's kind of, I'm really interested in like ecclesiastical embroidery as well, and the fact that only men were allowed to do it because they had the hardest and strongest of hands. So I find it really, interesting to kind of engage with those materialities and the histories of those materialities. But yeah, this is kind of the work in progress. So it's a digital print, a dye sublimation print on cotton drill, and then working with, this is a semi-industrial embroidery machine. And so you work with different vector art, and then you go through a process of stitch digitization, where you kind of set the stitches and the densities and the patterns, and you can kind of layer all of those things. And then that just sews it out really beautifully for me, and it's very noisy. But yeah, that's that kind of project in process, Impossible Evolutions. So next up, we have got the Pixel Locket, Chuan and Emma's beautiful project that they've been working on. So would you guys like to chat about that?
Yeah, Emma. Oh, no. I'm supposed to go first, right? Okay. Sorry. Yes. Thanks, Kate. So the Pixel Locket. This is a rather interesting project for us, for the both of us, for various reasons, and we'll go into that into detail later on. So the Pixel Locket was the initial project that contributed to the thinking around the notion of a data heirloom. In my conversations with Emma, as we plotted through our own PhD research, we were generating discourse around how we value preciousness in our digital traces. And building on what we said in the opening, it was a relatively simple question that prompted this collaboration. And the question is this: what if we experienced Instagram photographs in a different way, almost meditatively, and instead of having the relative luxury of taking in the entire image, we get presented a slow, low-resolution manifestation instead. And perhaps it is this process that might allow us again to reflect on the intent behind each shared image. And one of the interesting things too, Simon, you just click on to number 3, please. Slide 3, thanks. And I think one of the earlier explorations that we did was kind of trying to unpack the taxonomy of hand interactions, mapping out the different efforts, the exertions, and the kind of degree of affect that these generations, or rather these kind of gestures may have. And gave us a sense of exploring the effective qualities of each gesture. The first of hopefully more artifacts, we kept things simple, relying on a sense of touch and body temperature to influence the behavior of the pixel locket. And I'll show more of that later on. Over to Emma now.
Thanks, Chuan. Can you just go over to slide 4, please, Simon? So as the project progressed, we were really thinking about the connections between the digital, material, and human, and how you could sort of create enduring meaning when the digital is often something that is so rapid, it's so immersive, and often so kind of fleeting. We sort of are on to the next thing. Nothing kind of really retains your attention. And so we were initially sort of thinking about the materiality of the wearable and that idea of preciousness. Our sort of initial kind of conversation started out sort of thinking about crystals and how these sort of types of, often, in a pendant, they're used as amulets for luck and protection, prosperity. People sort of feel like they encompass a certain level of power and meaning and ritual. They have the ability to sort of enchant and empower. There's a preciousness and a mystery there in those kinds of artifacts. Here you can see Chuan and I were sort of really experimenting with doing things like, so we made molds of actual kind of crystals, made eco-resin casts, which we embedded LEDs and fiber optics in, and we were sort of exploring with different sort of light outputs in that kind of format, and sort of thinking about how that kind of use of materiality might sort of work in the project. As we sort of went through that process, we're really thinking about how to create a common aesthetic thread to connect the form with the function of the device, and then really sort of this idea of an ongoing story and preciousness, because as everybody knows, often with wearable technology, it has a fairly sort of short shelf life, and there's that sort of planned obsolescence, and people kind of lose interest after a while. Again, the remote kind of nature of the project meant that we were really lucky that Chuan happened to get a 3D printer right before lockdown. And so these really beautiful 3D prints are his spectacular work in the garage, which it was quite fumey, I believe. You can see down the bottom there, Simon, if you just scroll down a bit, you can see my my home casting setup out on the front deck. So again, there was sort of this sort of remote nature of collaboration here. And yeah, so we're really thinking about the technical, physical, and spiritual layers of the object, and how, and then it sort of emerged, kind of then sort of thinking about, I guess, really the philosophical kind of standing of a legacy personal object like a locket. A locket is a keepsake. It's a time capsule. It's a private, precious, sentimental object that holds, often holds one memory. It's one photo. And that became really interesting for us to think about, because Instagram, it's a repository, but of many photos. And often we only spend, I think it's 4 or 5 seconds now actually just kind of consuming that image. So, when we sort of start to think about, okay, well, what about one image for a day? What about every single pixel of that image? What about reliving that memory, actually sort of going back into it and savoring it as a moment? That became a really interesting way of sort of reinterpreting the locket. So yeah, you can see it's sort of a variety of the tests that we did there, and then sort of how we sort of played with the idea of materiality. And then Simon, if you can go to slide 6 for me. And then here's a series of the sort of iterations that we went through in terms of the CAD design process. There was sort of two aesthetic kind of directions that we went in terms of sort of metaphors. We were kind of thinking about, here you can see Chuan did some really beautiful iteration where he was sort of thinking about the crystal and then breaking it down into a network and starting to kind of take that structure and think about it as a way of diffusing the light from the pixel image as it was sort of relayed through the device. And yeah, and then I sort of started to really think about, yeah, you know, the pixel itself and how that might sort of be used as a design metaphor to then sort of relate back to the story that we were kind of exploring there.
Great. And Simon, if you go to slide 8, great, thank you. And one of the more peculiar parts of our collaboration was that the Pixel Locket, like with many of the other projects shown this evening, was made during Victoria's coronavirus lockdown across 2020 and 2021. So as such, it presented a rather interesting juxtaposition. You know, here we are producing an artifact that seeks out the intangible, effective qualities of digital media, while at the same time we're finding ways to manage social isolation and make use of technology old and new to remain communicating, making, and experimenting. So over this mode of remote discussion, the technical development kind of came into play. You know, I guess we were just all having this kind of benefit, I suppose, of being able to work in a garage or work in a little workshop. And so that resulted in me developing this microcontroller platform called Remote Mini that was created to enable the Pixel Locket to happen, and hopefully in the future for future IoT projects, we could also be using that as the basis for creating and designing interactions with electronics. So if we Simon, if you go to slide 9. And so that's the Remote Mini, and that's a platform that I designed and had it manufactured, and it had this ability to have a daughter boards or additional add-ons to the setup. In this case, the Remote Mini itself with the Pixel Locket would have a temperature sensor, which would then be used to detect the sense of touch as we hold on to the Pixel Locket. And then on top of that, the temperature sensor is able to detect how warm we have been keeping this locket. So the idea around sustaining your grasp or just cradling the Pixel Locket over a long period of time would then create the ability for us to sense that we have been holding for a long time as well. And that will create all these different possibilities and parameters that we can actually design with into this with this platform. So over this mode of remote discussion, this emerged and the exploration of the wireless charging gesture. So Simon, if you go to slide 10, please. And so we started thinking along the lines of, well, we have a Pixel Locket, and the Locket itself is just a device, a wearable device. What if we actually start thinking along the gesture and almost the ritualistic approaches of placing a wearable, in this case, the Pixel Locket, onto a charging base? And we wanted to really kind of engage with the sense of, exertions and how we're able to just trigger various different events to happen. In this case, putting this Pixel Locket onto the table will allow the Pixel Locket to recharge itself, obviously, but at the same time, it will allow the images from Instagram to then flow into the Pixel Locket again for the new day to begin. So that said, I will now switch over to my camera view again and just give you a quick demonstration of this. It feels like a cooking show, so I've got this prepared in the oven, so yeah, it's coming out here. So that's the Pixel Locket, at least one version or one iteration of it, and hope you can see this. Yeah. And so the idea now is that we're able to see that there's a bit of a light coming. Oh, sorry, wrong hand. So a bit of a light emerging from the Pixel Locket. And the idea is that, just by holding and kind of grasping in your arms or in your hands, will create this kind of a soft glow of intensity that gets stronger and stronger as you keep holding onto it. And so You might be wondering though that, well, these colors, what do they mean and what do they represent too? I think it might be revealed a little bit better once you see the actual image used to create the stream of pixels. So I will do that review now. If I share my, I could share this, yeah. I could share that, yeah. So what you're seeing right now with the pixels is actually the individual colors of this image of my dog Bendy on Instagram. And it's just all these kind of warm shades of brown and yellow. And then as you kind of hold on to it, they kind of intensify in their saturation, therefore reaching this kind of warm glow of reds. There are in total, based on the algorithm, 384 pixels getting generated as a result of this image being quantized down to 18 by 18 pixels across and down. And so the idea here is we will be able to then hold on to this pixel locket for a new day. Every time we post a new image onto Instagram, the algorithm just scans through this image, runs through the entire array of pixel colors, and animates that through the form of just single pixel transitions throughout the entire day. So effectively, we are no longer actually seeing an Instagram image. And instead, we are just seeing the little streams of colors peeling out slowly from it. And as a result, there was always quite this amazing discovery and almost a moment of anticipation, because during one of our testing phases, we agreed with each other that we won't be peeking at Instagram, but instead we'll be relying on our test objects, we are located miles away from each other. And so we're just always anticipating what's going to happen in the new image that we send out to Instagram. So it's a bit of that connection that we discovered through, this kind of forced mode of distant learning, I suppose. And there's something quite magical about this as a result too. So that is the Pixel Locket.
Okay.
And I suppose let's, thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Can you go back to the slides, please, Simon, for the Pixel Locket? Sorry, there was just a couple of last slides we missed there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go to slide 11, please? And yeah, so just to kind of continue on from what Chuan was saying, what was really interesting that sort of emerged out of this project in those explorations was the actual interaction with the device itself has sort of took on a life of its own. And yeah, the reframing of a memory or an image as something that it's slow, it's precious, it's private, and it becomes quite intimate. And the device itself actually really took on a life of its own during that period, even though, it didn't have a form yet. It was just this little sort of piece of hardware that was sort of glowing, but it was really kind of quite beautiful. And it really started to get me thinking a lot about this idea of techno-animism. It was really fascinating to see the way that it really developed over that period. Can you go to slide 12, please, Simon? And, one of the other things that was really kind of extraordinary about this project was, coming from a background in industrial design and jewelry, I've been sort of really fascinated about the idea of designing bespoke wearable technology, but the complexities of not only getting the technology to work, but then to miniaturize it is next level. So it was really fantastic and amazing to see the way that Chuan was able to take the initial prototype and then go and kind of miniaturize it and produce these bespoke microelectronics to actually kind of make something that was at a size that you would wear. And yeah, it's just an incredible process to kind of go through. Can you go to slide 13, please, Simon? And so really where we sort of arrived in the end with this project was two sort of aesthetic outcomes. So one of them was very much sort of based on the idea of the crystal and the network. And then another sort of route that emerged with the design on the right-hand side was actually the use of grasshopper and parametric modeling to sort of come up with a alternative, which was actually sort of really thinking about the pixel as a design element that we might sort of subtract from the overall form. So this is an example of the use of grasshopper, and the wonderful Arthur from the industrial design program actually sort of helped me out with this. But based on the number of pixels in an image, we actually sort of created a a sort of crystal for the pendant that was actually had that amount of pixels subtracted from it. And so that sort of ended up being a really interesting way of starting to look at data physicalization and how you can sort of encode value. Yeah, thank you. Move on to the next one.
Gorgeous, thank you. Well, the next one, Emma, is your generative cough. So would you like to chat to us about that?
Fantastic, thank you. Sweet, all right, can we go to slide 1, please, Simon? Okay, so this project was another one of my PhD projects, and I guess my introduction to Grasshopper and starting to think about generative design and parametric design methods and tools and how you might sort of go about using them in a jewelry or accessories or a wearable technology space. I had the opportunity in 2018 to travel to Austria and go and attend an algorithmic accessories design workshop at an architectural school there with a really fantastic group of creative individuals called Design Morphine. These guys are all incredible creative nuts that design Grasshopper plugins. And so they put on these sort of amazing workshops a few times a year, and people from all over the world kind of come and pile in and test out the plugins and use the definitions and build definitions and come up with crazy, amazing stuff. So that was a really amazing but also intense kind of introduction to Grasshopper. So the workshop I went to, we're working with Grasshopper to develop parametric design definitions around generative growth patterns in nature. And this particular design was of a cuff, and it was based on stalagmite formations in caves. So on the left there, you can see a couple of images of what I was sort of kind of thinking about in terms of inspiration, sort of looking at those ways that materials are soluble in suspension in caves and create these extraordinary sort of suspended structural kind of elements. And then if you go to slide 3, you see the example of the cuff that I actually sort of produced. So this has been, yeah, I guess this was a really foundational sort of experience for me in my PhD journey, because I was really sort of thinking about hybrid workflows of analog practice and digital means, and how you could produce precious objects of enduring aesthetic and emotional value that include things like CAD and sort of digital kind of production mediums, but then also the materiality and the processes and workflows that make jewelry such a evocative, precious, amazing thing that people hang on to their entire lives. So if you can go down to the next slide, number 4, please, Simon. So this was really my first introduction to kind of working with creative coding and starting to think about ways of bringing that into a design process. I did a little Grasshopper course before I went and did this workshop. The workshop was crazy. It was with an MIT professor who was a Grasshopper genius. And it was like, oh my gosh, they've managed to make CAD harder by adding code on top of it. But the extraordinary kind of opportunities with using parametric modeling methods, and it's a different way to kind of think about nature and math and formations that we kind of see in and around life. So it's kind of quite fascinating to start to think about that in conjunction with how we approach things like the jewelry making process. And so what kind of really came out of it for me was looking at new ways of abstracting data to create value, and data physicalization as a method of encoding value. So you can go to number 5, please, Simon. And I guess one of the other things I'm really exploring in the PhD, like a couple of my projects are sort of around wearable health technology and, thinking about how we develop kind of holistic, meaningful connections for people. And a big thing there is personalization. And that's something that, jewelers are really, fantastic at creating those really meaningful personal objects for people. And I guess kind of shifting into this space and seeing the opportunities to customize and personalize things based on different variables was really exciting. So here you can see these are a set of the different iterations in the design process for developing this cuff. And so a series of different variables have been played with in terms of sort of size and scope and etc. And if you go to number 6, you can see this sort of the final design that sort of settled on for the end of this project. And so, yeah, I guess that's the other thing too, is, you know, the challenge, and definitely when I did the workshop, there was a lot of architects and people from all sorts of really interesting design backgrounds. But when it came to sort of taking the 3D prints and the designs and 3D printing them, often they were too complex and just weren't 3D printable. So it's also that, yeah, taking it from the digital to the physical and making it sort of work in real life is, you know, the other sort of part of the riddle when it comes to sort of working with some of these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. All right. Lucky last, Chuan, we've got your thing on a stick.
Yes, thanks, Kate. So this is the final project in our exhibition. And this, just like the other two projects that I've shown in today's presentation and talk, is the third one of a series of objects, which I call slow objects, and it's part of my PhD research as well. And the thing on a stick, like the name implies, is just this, you know, strange, vague object, which is another result of a critical making process and experimentation that, in how I see it, condenses and maps quantifiable data to a more interpretive form, in this case, visible light. So in this object, I continue to work with digital data, in particular the poster child for internet sound bites, that is Twitter. Experiments with light quality became the aesthetic study for this mapping. So I was testing out parametric shifts and the phasing of hue, saturation, brightness. And in recent months, as I keep tweaking the coding for this, the temporal patterns, which were far more able to convey a certain sense of maybe urgency or a certain sense of time to it, to the data being expressed. So it was quite interesting too, because I have been living with this guy in the background for many years, and it's just kind of like quietly plodding along in the background, just emitting these different colors and waves. And I've just kind of grown to understand that as almost like a barometer for, you know, whether anyone's just kind of rage tweeting in the neighborhood. It kind of picks that up, and then it starts to, you know, rage itself as well. So there's something quite interesting about that approach, in which the proxemics of understanding information, digital information, is now no longer just something that you whip out on the phone and understand it and just read it, but it's something that you experience within that built environment, in this case, the domestic, you know, home. So on the data processing end, like I said just now, you know, a very similar sentiment analysis engine, which was used in my Wooden Hearts project. It collects geofenced Twitter phrases on the internet and produces a consolidated disposition of the locality's online presence in as far as Twitter is concerned. So the sentiment is mapped to the hue palette through user preset options, aligned to one's own subjective preferences for specific colors and intensities. And that was one of the journeys that I was kind of discovering too, in terms of choosing colors and being, you know, looking at the biases and subjectivity of how we preference colors in different contexts and situations. Quite an interesting learning journey emerged just through me living with this object right now. Interactively, I think the work also explores the proxemics of peripheral notification using kind of extended signaling distances and bodily presence as a way to activate the device. There's a little sensor up there right at the top, which is a laser rangefinder, and it kind of wakes up as you approach it, you know, anywhere between 4 meters to 2 meters. It just kind of wakes up and kind of greets you. So interactively, you know, cognitively, the preference colors as set by the owner engages with one's own recognition of hue and light patterns and derives a bespoke reading of the perceived sentiments. So the thing on a stick is at once a generic luminaire, disposition barometer, and a device that also demands absolute peripheral attention. And I do kind of enjoy creating works with that duality in it, because it really engages and kind of disrupts the way we see the world. And in my case, in my own research, how we really should be looking at digital media beyond just things that live on the screen. So that's it in the background. It's been doing this kind of color shift in the background, and over time it just slowly transforms, and it's kind of like my companion these days. So maybe that's a little bit sad, but I think that's a little bit fun too, because I just kind of enjoy reading what Twitter is telling me based on those lines, So that's the thing on the stick. And that is the seventh project in this show. I would like to also kind of take this chance to remind everyone that the website's live. Feel free to just go through all of the individual works and just look at the kind of process sketches and images, as well as the 3D models that have been put together to make this digital exhibition happen. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you. Well, that's fantastic. That kind of wraps up all of the talking that we want to do. And we really appreciate everyone coming and listening. It's, I suppose, can be really isolating at the best of times to be a design researcher. So it's really fantastic to be able to, socialize the things that we're thinking about and share them with other people. So on that, we're really curious and open if anyone has any questions that they want to ask anybody, or any comments or anything. We would really love to open that up to our wonderful audience who has sat with us for the past hour. You can chat a question or be so bold as to turn on your audio and shout one out. It's up to you. But yeah, if there's any questions, we would really love to hear from anyone.
I got a question, if I may.
Great. Never happens.
No, I'm going to jump in straight away. And this is, I suppose this is a little bit pointed because I've got a few students in this class as well, but obviously there's a huge amount of process that's gone through all of these projects, which is beautiful to see. And it's lovely to see everybody, delving deep into whether it's the tech or a certain concept and really evolving this. I'm intrigued to sort of get a bit of insight into how you guys have dealt with the challenges that you've been faced with in the last, the last 18 months, but, in the immediate fashion, obviously you're very challenged with the exhibition, given, lockdowns and all this sort of thing, but more from a making perspective. So, have you found it challenging to get materials, access resources, and how you've overcome those challenges, I suppose?
Anyone want to take that? I'm happy to jump in while people are thinking. I suppose the last 18 months has been really difficult just in timelining projects. So, I get the turnaround for, printing and jacquard and tapestry, things like that has really blown out quite significantly. I suppose it's just something you need to take in your stride. I think any design project is probably initially defined mostly by its limitations, and so you have to see limitations as opportunities. So maybe if you've got to wait for materials, it means you need to explore other materials or spend time on it at a different juncture within the design process. But yeah, it's definitely been a challenge, a significant challenge, and there's a whole bunch of work that I haven't been able to finish for the exhibition, just straight up, because I don't have a laser cutter here. So yeah, it's just a challenge, and it's just one that I think we need to kind of adapt to. But any other observations, Emma, Chuan?
Yeah, look, I think part of being a designer is you have to be a really good creative problem solver. I didn't necessarily realize how creative we need to get with trying to kind of use things that you sort of had lying around the house or at hand to do the tests that you need to do, to try and get around not being able to find access to materials, or just the things that we really kind of took for granted in the past. So I think that ability to creatively problem solve and Frankenstein things together or Wizard of Oz stuff together for particular formats, it feels like we've kind of had to go, well, everybody, who's a designer, creative person has had to kind of go next level in, thinking around how to get kind of around some of those sort of challenges and obstacles. I think, one of the other things is you know, and certainly with this show, I mean, I'm the same. I have a bunch of beautiful artifacts here that are, you know, they're made out of silver. They're incredible, expensive, precious materials that have been sort of, you know, it's a process to make them. So they've been 3D printed, and then they've been cast, and then they have to be hand finished, and then they have to be sort of a certain level of fabrication has to happen to kind of connect them to the actual sort of pixel locket final kind of piece. You know, I also need to kind of get some chain for that. I mean, these are all processes that, you know, in jewelry and making, you kind of go through sort of fairly quickly. But, you know, 2 weeks ago, it was like, all right, well, are we building a digital version of the exhibition, or are we finishing off our artifacts and, you know, sending them out? And so yeah, you also need to, I think, be smart and clever and strategic and realistic about, okay, what are the things of value that matter, and where do you need to kind of put your time and energy and resources in terms of what you need to deliver for particular projects. And this is whether you're, you know, a student or a professional, I think, working in industry, really need to think about it now.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, you know, there are 2 parts to it really. So the first part, which is more of the kind of tangible part of prototyping, yeah, in terms of getting materials, we've often had to MacGyver our own solutions, you know, find things, make things up from cardboard, mock things up with tape and stuff. And I think that was kind of useful for us to have discussions. And I remember showing Emma, you know, things taped up, or just, you know, strange blurry webcam photographs of prototypes that we're trying to put together. And I think that's part of what maybe could be the new kind of norm in the future for us design practitioners, is finding different ways to be creative in sharing our output. And I would say that, you know, various different digital tools have been really helpful for us, you know, thankfully. But I think on top of that, the tool itself isn't really key. It's more about how we actually want to work with each other. It's how we choose to decide, you know, how are we going to plan things out? How are we going to work out, you know, objectives and things to do? And I think that was a great learning experience, you know, just kind of figuring out how do we shift that. It's no longer as simple as going out to your table, your desk, Emma, and going, hey, what do you want to do with this thing? You know, you don't have that luxury anymore. So I think that's the other thing that we have experienced. On the other side of it, you know, looking at software development and coding, I guess most people would be quite led to believe perhaps that, you know, coding is just easy. You could code anywhere, you can do anything anywhere. But I think when you start to have this kind of creative practice that engages or kind of enmeshes coding with tangible physical creation, you're still kind of tied to this process. This creative process is still really key, it's still important. Yeah, so that's just something that I just wanted to make up, just wanted to set up.
And yeah, and one thing that I'll sort of add on to that, which I think is a great point, Chuan, is yeah, so like it's kind of been kind of quite funny in, you know, putting together the sort of last bits of this exhibition. Like so last night we were trying to kind of arrange things and sort of work out where stuff was going to go in the 3D exhibition spaces. I was driving, and then Kate and Chuan were kind of telling me sort of where they wanted their work, and it was like left, no left, no my left, no your left, and you know, it's kind of quite hilarious to think about, yeah, you know, how you sort of navigate remotely in those spaces. One other thing I would sort of say too for any students that are sort of, you know, obviously I invited kind of a lot of our honours students that are finishing off their major projects. Another big thing to kind of think about too is, yeah, what programs you choose to be across. So just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of how we've just put together what we just did today. So, I mean, I'll tell you the programs I was using, and then the others can tell you what they were using, but I used Art Studio, Photoshop, Illustrator, Rhino, and Fusion and Figma, and Excel, and Word.
So much Excel.
In that order, Emma?
Probably, yeah. Word was last.
Yeah. Figma's been really fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just finding those opportunities for learning packages, you know, just what can we do to communicate to each other really quickly. I think that's going to be the next big thing for us, for anyone working out there, really, I suppose. You know, not only just the creative industries.
Yeah, you got to be flexible and optimistic.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's a phrasing thing, a framing thing. Like, can you turn a limitation into an opportunity? You know, does it enable you to focus on something to the side or something peripheral? You know, can you go deeper on something else while you wait? I think ultimately it's a slowing down, and while that might feel frustrating, a lot of the time I think we're going too fast anyway. So maybe it's somewhat of a blessing. Any more questions, queries, concerns, comments?
So yeah, I just wanted to say that I just want to commend you all. What wonderful work that you've produced, and especially over that time of lockdown and everything that you've just been talking about. But I just wanted to say this is going to be a fantastic opportunity to share with a lot of the students as case study. As an opportunity for students to learn from, because I'll be definitely directing all my students to this side as a demonstration of people getting through projects and developing work in a place where they keep saying, I can't, you know, because I don't have the materials. But, you know, this is a wonderful case study. And to be honest, I would encourage RMIT to make this as a case study example and post it, you know, throughout the School of Design and further, just to say, look, this is what people can do when they work together and work with the resources at hand, and just kind of see problems as challenges. So sorry, it's not a question, it's just more of a comment. Wow, it's really good.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you
Thanks,
so
Caroline.
much.
Yeah, really good.
Really appreciated. Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge that it's actually been really hard too. You know, it's sort of the duck swimming under the surface. We have this beautiful artifact, but it's been a lot of work. But I mean, everything usually is, you know, any good outcome typically does involve a lot of work. And I think it's just important to acknowledge or to realize that this kind of flexibility and difficulty is just part of a process to get to a new point or a new paradigm, a new way of doing. And so it might be uncomfortable and difficult, but at some point you do kind of have to just dive in and see what happens, see if it works or not. Luckily, in this case, it did.
And it must have been hard putting all that exhibition together. Like that was quite a lot of explorative work to find the platforms that would work for you. So, you know, I felt really like I was immersed in the projects, and it was very exciting to just, you know, for you to take us through everything. It was very dynamic. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, look, it was definitely furthering onto Kate's point 2 weeks ago when we when we sort of had to make the decision whether we're going to have something or not, and it was like it was disaster talk, and I was like, oh well, I saw a PhD presentation that seemed to kind of use a cool piece of software. I feel like I have a screenshot somewhere, and you know, so I went and found what the platform was. And it was just, you know, really fortunate that Chuan had done an incredible job of sort of planning and working what components we were going to use out of the MDIT exhibition system. So it was all kind of laid out, ready to grab the real thing and set it up. And so we kind of went, all right, well, we've got the plan. We can probably build the components in 3D for real pretty quickly. They're not too complicated. And so we built the system, did the configuration that Chuan worked out for the exhibition. So it really has been an incredible sort of group effort. Threw it into Studio, which is the platform, and it was the free version of the platform. We were like, okay, well this looks like it works, it's good. And so we went, cool, okay, we think we can do it. And then you know, fast forward a couple of days, and you know, we'd done the first like amazing sort of like, you know, didactic panel, looked incredible. Tried to upload it, and it was like maximum upload file size for the free version of software is 10 meg, and it was like, holy moly, whoa, okay. So then we're like, oh god, we've got to make everything tiny but like high resolution, and no, it definitely has been sort of tumultuous to kind of work out whether we could do it, but yeah, we made it happen. So yeah, I think it is important to acknowledge that. Yeah, you just have to kind of hang in there, and but yeah, there's often kind of there's always a way around. Everything's negotiable ultimately, I think, when it comes to creative projects.
Well done.
Okay, I might hop in if I can.
Please, Walter.
Yeah, thanks for a fantastic presentation, and your work's really great to see, and I agree with Caroline. You know, it's a really nice example of what can be done. if you put your mind together. But I'll start with, I also don't have a question. I have a sort of a territory of thought. That's the best I can do. And I'm sort of moving on from what you opened with, Kate, with this idea that, you know, the stories have been told across this land for tens of thousands of years, and a lot of those stories still exist. And, you know, one of the stories is that, you know, you used to be able to walk from Melbourne to Tasmania. And so the original, you know, custodians of our land knew that and had stories of the time when he could do that. And sort of that brought me to, you know, thought of archaeology, of how, you know, we can dig in the ground and we can find things and construct sort of a narrative of how people lived. And, you know, in the future, archaeologists might have to start digging in cyberspace. And this is sort of, I think, where some of this work sort of fits. Maybe you can just talk about that idea of this digital heirlooms and you know, thinking about the future of sort of data, maybe, and how this data can tell stories about our lives, because a lot of it will be lost, perhaps. Maybe not. Maybe the, you know, cyberspace archaeologists will find it again. But yeah, maybe it's not a question, sort of a territory of thought. I don't know if you can talk to that yet.
I think that's a really compelling idea, you know, and I suppose any artifact of culture is able to be lost, and any material artifact is liable to decompose and be destroyed by time. And I suppose, you know, the digital, while it might feel like this kind of seemingly immaterial thing, it's still kind of subject to decay and loss and things like that, which is really fascinating. You know, often I think we have all of these servers and farms of information and data that's kind of you know, quite overwhelming and potentially catastrophic if it's lost. But then we also have these beautiful personal archives, like on our machines and on our devices. And so I think it's a really interesting idea. You know, I think a lot of the projects that we've been working on have been kind of grappling with these ideas of how to make something, you know, immaterial, how to translate that into a physical preciousness or into some type of, I suppose, vessel or medium way of being stored. So yeah, you know, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think too, you know, this is a tangent as well, but thinking, you know, about the types of information that's stored on different servers in different places, and how that might collectively, I suppose, illustrate like a point in time or a culture is a really interesting idea. You know, what the last server on Earth might represent about humanity is like a really interesting idea. I kind of love that idea. But yeah, it's the kind of digital archaeology, that's a really compelling idea, I think. I really like that. I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add to that. My child's just come in here.
I'll add to that really quickly about this too. I did remember, you know, in 2008, in another project that I did for, back then was my master's project, I saved and downloaded a snapshot of Wikipedia, and it wasn't that large, surprisingly. It was around, I believe, 54 gigabytes of information, all compressed. And I keep thinking back along the lines of, you know, well, that was like a snapshot of the future, you know, that's a snapshot of that moment in time of everyone's collective edits and everyone's opinions, all just kind of captured in that time capsule. And when I started looking at my works, these kind of objects that I created, they almost are a live, real-time kind of stream of consciousness in terms of how they are emanating information in that instance. But I have never quite seen that connection yet, and maybe now I will, Malta. So thanks. That ability to just look into that memory. I mean, there was some other project that I worked with, that involved memory, the notion of memory and storing that information, but not in the sense of the internet. And I think that's a very fascinating idea. How do we capture these things, and how do we actually create a moment for us to find ways to really reminisce about it, if that is the right word, or to find ways to just kind of revisit those moments. We have the Internet Archives, and it's always an interesting website to go to. But however, maybe there's this other new opportunities to kind of find these moments, the archaeological approaches, having that kind of lens to look at how we look at, the history of the internet and digital media. I think that will be quite fascinating.
Okay,
Thanks, Malta. I think that's a really fabulous question, and those are really lovely, thoughtful responses, Kate and Chuan. And it's interesting, I guess, kind of continuing on from that. Like, one of the things that I have sort of thought about in my research and thinking and stuff is the idea of legacy objects in life, so things that have disappeared because of dematerialization. And then, I was sort of thinking about this idea of legacy objects, and then I sort of fell into researching legacy software, which is sort of, found kind of really fascinating because, as certain machines and certain kind of databases and softwares stop working, you need different legacy kind of versions of software to be able to kind of access old stuff as it sort of disappears, kind of into the depths of the sort of, the data mine or whatever. And it sort of becomes really fascinating to kind of think about, what is a legacy object in life, and that idea of trying to kind of hold on to particular kind of sort of memories, and then also how do we kind of translate that into the internet. So, I mean, obviously something like a record has much more longevity than other types of digital objects, and certainly kind of wearable technologies that often the operating system or planned obsolescence kind of dictates how long that thing's going to sort of potentially kind of work for. And we talked a lot about the various kind of digital objects we've been working with here, and things like kind of updates and being able to kind of keep those things sort of working and active. And so again, that potentially kind of sort of losing these things into the sort of depths of time becomes a really sort of interesting kind of question, how you sort of preserve that going forward.
Great. Yeah. Thanks everyone. That's really nice answers or responses.
So, are there any final comments or thoughts, territories that anyone wishes to navigate with us?
Hi. I have a question. It's more technical, I guess, but in terms of the locket, what determines the size of the locket? Is it the technology that it's available, or have you been able to make it exactly as you plan it? That makes sense.
Yeah. So basically the dimensions of the locket itself. Yeah. I guess we were kind of at the same time, we were trying to design the electronics to make it as compact as possible. But I guess this brings up this really important conversation about how we collaborate, I think, because, from my own perspective, I am not an engineer by training. A lot of these things I have to pick up on my own. So I would imagine that the next inevitable phase of working with these kind of prototypes is to start beginning this conversation and bringing in more experts across different fields to really begin that conversation, in this case of miniaturization, optimization, and so on. But I felt like the creative process that we have indulged in needed an almost technical kind of lens through which we can then, generate these ideas. I think that's one of the biggest challenges really in any creative work that engages in particular with digital technology, is almost exerting this requirement for us to treat digital media, electronics engineering, almost as a material, as a medium in which we create our craft. and I think that's really important. That's what I have always tried to kind of push for myself. And yeah, but I think to answer your question, yeah, if it was smaller, have different form factors, we could actually have more different ways to play around with what can appear. Yeah, what it can look like.
I think one of the interesting things too is really when you're designing any sort of wearable technology projects is, yeah, you got to think about power and batteries. So often, you kind of go, oh, okay, great, we've got all the tech in there. And then you're like, oh, but we need a battery that's going to be able to power it to be on and do particular things for X amount of time. So Chuan's been really fantastic because, yeah, as we sort of worked through the process and thought about the various ways that we could manifest this project and what we wanted it to do and how we wanted it to do those particular kind of things. Yeah, there was a lot of, okay, well, we could have this kind of battery, but we're going to need to charge it in this particular kind of way, which means we're going to need to put the battery here and then sandwich the tech in this particular kind of way. And so really it's sort of a symbiosis between kind of the form and the tech and the function. And yeah, so Chuan was fantastic because he kind of bring out sort of 2 or 3 different battery options, and then we sort of try and think about how we could fit them, and then bringing induction charging into the mix, and then sort of working out how we'd still be able to kind of make it able to kind of connect to the internet and all those sorts of things. So there's definitely a lot of magic to the Tetris of getting everything inside something. But I mean, I'm so delighted with the size because it was actually based on it's pretty sort of close territory to a particular pendant that I made in the past, and we managed to kind of get it into the same sort of proportion sort of size. So, but yeah, we're kind of thinking about sort of a statement piece that would also be kind of really comfortable and lovely to hold in the hand.
Hey, Joseph.
You're muted.
Okay.
Are you back?
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. So I had a question. So when you think of heirlooms, you think of very personal and private symbolisms and relationships. So in an age where privacy issues are entering the spotlight, how do we pass down and preserve information, but while still keeping privacy?
I think that's a good point, Joseph, that you brought up, because looking at that device, I think on a stick, and even the Pixel Locket itself, the APIs that we have been working with to allow this to happen are built upon this kind of almost like an iron wall of privacy, access rights, and so on. Rightfully so, because the ethics of dealing with personally identifiable information is really important in today's age and time. And there was this, the Solid project by Tim Berners-Lee tries to kind of reshape this whole idea around personal identity into the form of personal pods that we can carry around. And I think that is hopefully changing the way we see personal information, because it is now all solely in the grasp of large organizations who have full access to all of the information that you have been posting onto various social media platforms and various things on the internet. So I think that's a really important question to be always asking when you're working across digital media. How is privacy potentially impeding or rather being intruded upon? I think that's a better way to describe that. Because we always have to be careful about this. And what was interesting too about even something like a thing on a stick was that the Twitter feed, well, I'm only grabbing feeds that individual users have permitted to well, I'm only accessing publicly available tweets, and not ones that individuals have decided not to share with the rest of the world. And so in that creates almost another secondary layer of disparity too. We talk about, we we have talked about algorithmic biases, right? And how machine learning patterns are built upon data sets that may be biased in the way they were constructed. But I think what's coming up in the future could be another different form of privacy bias in a way, because then you now have people who choose to share information freely. You have people who prefer to keep their privacy. And that's going to change the way, we access and know information, because, in terms of understanding data, in terms of interpreting data, we only can work with data that we have access to. And who knows, that might change the way we see the world in the future. It's the same kind of debates and discussions around having vaccine passports, maybe, and how we now see that as a way to, ensure that we're able to travel from one place to another. But then at the same time, it doesn't quite put into, or rather it places people who choose not to have vaccine passports in that sense, or not to have their health records tracked in that sense, regardless of whether they have a vaccine or not. And that presents a whole new different dynamic to how we now interact with each other, because we are now defined by the information profiles that we have online. So, I have absolutely no idea how this will evolve, but I think it is precisely that some of the works that have been created here try to really kind of get us to look into how we are generating data and how we're using it, how we're communicating it to the people.
I think one of the other things that has kind of come through these projects as well, sorry, Kate, and yeah, certainly one for me that I've thought a lot about is the encoding of value. And I begin to wonder whether this is maybe part of this going forward in the future, because, something that's really beautiful about these projects is there's an abstraction of the data, and then there's an encoding. So, yeah, you need to kind of understand and have access to the work in order to interpret it. So maybe this level of abstraction and encoding is a way of kind of giving privacy and intimacy to the work. So, for instance, with the pixel locket, the image actually, yeah, you're walking around wearing that image, right? But in terms of actually kind of knowing what's in the content of that image and that memory, it's private to you. You're actually kind of, so it becomes kind of intimate and secret again. And I mean, I look at the way that Chuan and Kate have approached their work, and to me, there's a level of encoding there as well, which kind of gives it this sort of poeticness, in order for you to then be sort of invited in to kind of to actually sort of understand and access what that kind of data is.
So I guess kind of what I wanted to add to that, and circling back to part of what Malta was talking about as well, is maybe to approach the design of interactive systems, and particularly data informed interactive systems, from a position of relations. So thinking about the relations between the object, the data, and the people. And from that, I suppose it's a more, difficult way to design sometimes, and a less efficient way to design sometimes. But I think starting from a point of relations allows you to kind of put rules, limits, parameters around what the data is and who has access to it and who is affected by the power structures that are kind of implicated with that data set or with that data. And, as Emma was saying, this whole idea of encoding and heirlooms, often these things are embedded with stories, right? And it's only through a relational act of humans communicating that data can transfer. So, it's kind of, I think, working in a different way, and it's interesting because I think, there's a really wonderful book that I've read recently called Songlines by Margot Neal, and it's part of a new series of Indigenous knowledge books that have been produced in Australia. And so it kind of talks about the Indigenous Australian practice of songlines, and how stories were embedded in landscape, and people would have to sing the songlines and verbally activate the songlines, and certain songlines could only be sung in certain places at certain times by certain people. And it's this highly relational network of story data, of information being stored as stories within objects, within landscape. And it's a different way to think about how value is embedded and how information is embedded in objects. You know, it's like a fundamentally different way of thinking about that. And I just think it's actually a critical thing. It's something that we probably do need to put more attention to, you know, to really understand the implications of how data is stored and shared and communicated.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Hi.
Oh, hi. Hello.
Hi, Rose.
Hi. I was just wondering, it's quite interesting looking at all the material. Firstly, congratulations, an amazing job, and it's just been such a privilege to see. But also looking at all of the materials that each of you guys use, you focus on precious materials. How important was that going through? And did you guys have a conversation about that collaborative way of using precious materials through the project?
I mean, I suppose just through the conversations that we've had with each other, the through lines are, I guess, wanting to make things that are kind of aesthetically appealing to ourselves and to engage with materials that we respond to as individuals. And it's this idea of the relationship between materiality and preciousness, and how if you can sort of begin from that point, you might craft something that is less disposable and that can, you know, spend longer carrying a story or sharing a story. So I suppose our specific materialities, I think, are quite discursive and different. But the intention with kind of, you know, attending to particular materials or the way that materials make us feel is really quite fundamental to the design practice, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've had that conversation of being forced on, in lockdown, and we're using what's around us, and that really makes you think, what's accessible, and is this really important, and could I just use this other material, and will that become precious in the future? It's that sort of conversation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Will this piece of cardboard be valuable, in the future? And that's really exciting to me, because like you guys, I'm teaching online too, and I'm teaching my students, be really careful with that bit of material that you're using, because you don't have much of it. So, and in an ironic way, that in turn becomes really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, I don't know, I think too, there's different dimensions of preciousness. So scarcity is a dimension of preciousness sometimes if something is rare, and that scarcity is contextual, right? So in a time like this, cardboard can demonstrate scarcity and thus become precious, right? So that's like a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. But I think too, sometimes preciousness, I don't know, to me, this is my opinion, but it asks for like a slowing down, and to rest or to sit with something. And I think, I think that's valuable, and it's the same with my students. There's a lot of struggles to kind of access working materials and to kind of, demonstrate, especially with model making and things like that, how to do that is really, really challenging. But necessity is the mother of invention as well. You see some really incredible things come out of that scarcity.
Yeah.
So
I think, one of the other things that we've all sort of been thinking about in various ways as well is, how you sort of approach this idea of sustained enchantment. And and I think, for me, that a lot of that comes from, the materiality and, and these kind of porous objects where, the digital and material and the human elements sort of intermingle. One of the things with the pixel locket that Chuan and I sort of really tried to do was actually approach it as a modular piece of technology. So it's upgradable. all of the components can be sort of interchanged, and yeah, it can sort of sit into a different space than, you know, something where everything is kind of embedded and, you know, it has a sort of short shelf life. So, you know, how do the modularity of those components allow for that thing to be interchangeable and can continue to sort of go on and have a life?
Yeah.
I think to add to what Emma said, that's the modularity of it. Just everything just kind of removes from each other. But I think I'm not sure if you recall, Emma, but we're having that discussion one time around the different kind of materials we will use to make and print these things, and the subject around the patina of an object came about. You know, how an object would age over time, and how that would actually lend a sense of, again, preciousness to it. Only because we have been hanging on to it for a long time. I mean, looking at anything on a stick, it's just a wooden post that you get from Bunnings. Nothing special, nothing fancy about it. It's just Tasmanian oak they just get from that section, that aisle. But I think in the transformation of it, just the imbuing of these kind of textures, light textures, but also the things that are intangible, the meaning and the reasons of using the right colors, the right patterns to it. That in turn, to me, it's also about us trying to develop this kind of artificial patina, you know, and I thought that was potentially quite poetic in that sense, because we're just trying to give it an additional dimension of age, and that story is being told. You know, speaking about stories again, and the story is being told through all these additional layers of information that we add onto it, and I think there's something quite poetic about it, definitely. We did remember looking into different materials for the casing, and because of, you know, capacitance sensing, which detects the you know, just tiny amounts of electrical discharge in our bodies, and how that will actually transform the way it responds to our sense of touch. I think those were some of the experiments we were trying to really try to push for at the time too. Yeah. So I think material is certainly something that we would like to go back to once we have, you know, maybe more resources, but at the same time, finding what we can work with right now. You know, and interestingly enough, even in the electronics world, there's the silicon shortage, because the silicon semiconductor foundries around the world are just maxing out in terms of the amount of contracts that they're able to do. So I have my students running out of parts. You know, online shopping is dwindling these days because everything is going out of stock because of logistics and shipping. And in terms of, you know, making electronic things, we're going back right down to the basics. You know, I have students, I think she's here right now in this class, who use aluminum foil as switches in one of her projects and prototypes. And that was fantastic, because that's exactly how we should be kind of rebuilding our understanding of design in today's time and age. And I thought that's just, you know, splendid.
I think also the digital materiality has been really fascinating as well. Like, I mean, for me, working on the Cryptomori project, you know, I sort of stepped into this space of exploring creative coding with Touch Designer to start to develop some of the projection sort of mediums for the augmented reality projector that Kate and I are working with, and to kind of get in and sort of understand how to build something like a noise. And then you actually, you know, we took sort of footage of fungi out in the forest up in Marysville, and then sort of brought it in, and then yeah, used a series of creative kind of coding sort of engines in Touch Designer to then sort of morph this stuff into kind of creating these sort of multi-dimensional animated mediums to kind of go onto the object. And this became really interesting, because it's like, okay, so, you know, if you have a static precious object, and maybe you can only afford to kind of make that one sort of physical heirloom, but then are we overlaying you know, a constantly changing kind of digital material aspect to these things as we go in time, because actual physical objects, physical materials themselves become kind of, yeah, as we say, kind of scarce. And I mean, there was like a shortage of ceramics. So, you know, when Jude was trying to get terracotta to make the urns, and so it's like maybe digital overlays are the things we were able to kind of keep doing, but we have, you know, sort of less and less access to physical materials. It's an interesting question to ask.
Mm. Thank you. That's interesting.
Thank you. So nice to see you.
And you, I know.
Well, it's probably getting close to wrapping up. Is there any last question, query, comment, concern that anyone wants to bring up? Joseph? Hey.
Yes. So, sorry, I was still trying to formulate my question, so I hope. Sorry if it's a little messy. But because also when I think of heirlooms, it's like people usually start thinking of passing on. I mean, like some of these things you don't have to have this idea of passing it on, but when you're like close to death. But when I think of I guess let's say talk about future of heirlooms in general, it's like usually there's that idea of near the end of something, that's when you start deciding to create an heirloom. And I'd imagine that because we're talking about that with data, that there's like just a lot of it. And so I wonder if like, I guess like, is like who curates, or it's like what's who curates the data that gets sent. Like sometimes like if I were to give someone an heirloom, I might want to have a specific meaning that I hope will be meaningful to that person. So would you know would you one be able to curate that data? And also I guess if in the context of getting close to the end of a relationship, end of an era, or end of life, probably the one whose data, the owner of the data might not have too much time to even have their say on what should stay and what, and what shouldn't. So I guess are there any thoughts regarding on I guess how I guess the curation of data and stuff about end of life?
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinatingly contemporary question, right? And I think there's kind of like multiple, threads in there to kind of untangle. But there's, I suppose in terms of like end of life, approaching the end of life, typically there are a variety of practices around there that people need to engage in to manage their, tangible affairs or physical affairs. I wouldn't be surprised if we begin to adopt more formal practices around the management of our digital effects. And, Facebook has like the memorialization function. They've had that for quite some time. When someone passes, the page turns into a memorialized page. But, I suppose depending on people's digital literacy and, of course, like the degree of digital trace that they have, some people might be more adept at that than others. But it wouldn't surprise me if, and it wouldn't surprise me if already there are actually those services available to kind of help people manage their digital affairs towards the end of life. But it wouldn't surprise me if that becomes, more prevalent. But then in terms of like, I suppose the data and the stories and things being lost, I think that condition is not new. Any physical artifact has always got the capacity for the temporality of its meaning to be lost when someone, passes away. So I think that practice of like attaching a story or a memory to an object is not new. It's a very long tradition of that practice. But I think there are emerging conditions around the digital. I think just in terms of like the expanse and the depth, the amount of information, and how readily that information interfaces with like other systems and other clouds of information. That's a new complexity that's quite interesting. But I think that's a really fantastic question, and I think it's emergent. It's something that's being unpacked, unfolding at the moment.
I think to add to the whole like end of life thing, so because like I was just thinking of when would I want to, like, let's say, have wearables to remember someone. And I did have a friend who passed away suddenly, and I think and it's just like none, even if they were they like tech literate, it's the suddenness of the death that just made everyone question, like, so what do we do? I guess a lot of people aren't ready to figure out what they'll do with their data. And also I guess weaving it with the privacy is like, well, we can't even access some of the things that were private because they didn't allow it to be accessed, but that's the data that we want to cherish.
But the same is true for any memory. Enfolded in that person's mind is 1,000 snapshots and memories and moments that are trapped. So I think it's just that because we've created this condition with social media that everything should be accessible, and the culture that we're conditioned to now leads us to believe that the digitization of information means that it's always there and always available. That's a relation we need to dismantle. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not true. It's just so fundamentally untrue. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really interesting thing, though. I'm very compelled by that idea.
I think also, you sort of think about, before the digital, the heirlooms that you would kind of randomly end up with from your family, and often they were not the things that you would sort of, expect. And, often the stories are kind of locked in those objects, and, you don't kind of know their sort of significance. And, there'll be a great auntie that's kind of handed down some particularly ugly sculpt, kind of statue that you sort of randomly kind of end up with, and you don't know where it came from or why it was important, or, why you were the one that kind of ended up with it. And yeah, so often the things that are left behind, the things that become heirlooms are, they're awkward. They're, they sort of end up being those things that kind of fall down to you. It's funny. My grandma passed away a couple of years ago, and I had her last car for a while, and she had left like this first aid box in the glove box, which was from 1985. So probably, don't use any of the ointments. But it's really interesting because one artifact that kind of came from the car that I still have, and it's it's just been floating around my possessions, and I've ended up using it, is there's a blue plastic comb. And she used to kind of make sure that her hair was beautiful because she was very kind of well kept. And this one blue plastic comb, I still have it. I'm still using it. It's a blue plastic comb. Yet, this thing, which I think that's the interesting thing about heirlooms. It's worthless to someone else, but I know that it sort of held a special place in terms of ritual in her life, and she used it. And there's still kind of that kind of material, tangible connection back through it. So I think that's kind of it's the magic of heirlooms. They're often kind of worthless. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Well, the preciousness emerges from the relations and from the story, and that's kind of what this whole exhibition has been about. Is how to kind of embed those into things and make them meaningful, but with the added condition of technology. Yeah.
I'll add a few thoughts to that too, and I wonder, maybe I might be sounding a little bit cynical. I hope I'm not, but I do wonder that, looking at all these heirlooms that we have inherited from families and friends and so on, there's always a certain sense of a lack of control that we have on those things, right? We can't get a black comb. It's going to be a blue comb, and we can't get an object that is going to match your house or room decor, right? It's going to be totally random, and it's almost this. You look at the digital side of things, and you look at digital media today. There's always this persistent, pervasive promise of you having absolute control over everything. In that, you have the way to customize things. There's always this promise that you have all this information at your fingertips. And it almost dilutes this moment of preciousness, almost even suggesting that preciousness could be about these quirks, things that you don't really want, and that's precious. It's kind of weird, it throws it on its head. But maybe that's something that could be quite worth, tapping into, perhaps. So that's a great question, Joseph. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, things that I don't want. My mom's sewing machine, this giant manual Singer machine, the paddles. It's like, all right. It's sitting somewhere, It's like, I don't want it, but
I know.
Yeah. I don't know.
We have a collection of broken glasses, broken spectacles, and broken sunglasses. Like no obvious aesthetic value, like no functional value, but the preciousness is unrivaled by most other objects in our house. So it's like you can't, that idea of the condition of a relationship and how to center that in design, I think is really compelling and is a really interesting way forward, I think, for thinking about design. Yeah. Well, we have reached.
Thank you very much.
7 p.m. Thank you so much, Joseph. Really interesting questions. But we've got to 7, and I think maybe we should wrap it up because, I think we've talked about some very interesting things and really appreciate the questions and comments. Really, really wonderful. But thank you so much, everybody, for coming and for spending this time for us. We're very grateful. Very, very grateful.
Thank you very much. It was fantastic. Well done. You've done some awesome work. It was lovely to see it.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. And check the website and get in touch with any of us if you have any other questions at all. But thank you. Have a beautiful night. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Well done, guys.
So many interesting questions. They're really fun.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So it's so weird. Like it's finished.
It's done.
Well done.
There's no cleanup or backup to do.
Well done.
Amazing.
Well done. That was amazing.
Thanks so much, you guys. That was so much fun. I really enjoyed that conversation too.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, it was incredible, and it was so lovely to get everybody's perspectives on it. Yeah, really beautiful.
Yeah, and thanks Simon and Tim.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes, thanks guys. You were legends. I think it was so much better to have experts on the the technical end.
I wouldn't call myself an expert with AT Studio, but I've dipped in now.
But you were awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Just managing the Excel spreadsheet and the Teams window.
Yeah.
Out of my
fantastic.
Thanks so much, you guys.
Thanks for the IRL stuff, Jude. That was great.
Yeah.
Added a really dynamic aspect to things.
And Malta was like, oh my God, somebody doing real work.
Yeah.
There you go, going to Mikhail, number 2.
Oh, amazing.
Exciting, you guys. Fun.
It's nice. It was lovely. There's lots of discussion about materiality, surprisingly for a show that's so much about digital and data. A lot about materiality, which is good because everything is about manifestations into the real world. Everybody's project. Beautiful work, guys. It was really, really stimulating. It was just, you should all be very, very proud, and I can't wait to see it IRL. I can't wait when we next year. I can't wait. The work is really, really beautiful and tantalising. So yeah, and good work, getting it on video and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's as Caroline said, it's going to be a really good resource. All right, Jackie and I got to pack up.
All right, have a lovely night.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Good work.
Thank you.
Catch ya. Bye.